My name's Pam. I'm an alcoholic. Good afternoon, friends, and friends I have not met yet, because we're all friends here. I am happy to be here today, and I'm going to start out with a little reading that I like to start all of my talks with, because it's to remind me more than to remind you. The great fact is just this and nothing less, that we have had deep and effective spiritual experiences which have revolutionized our whole attitude towards life, towards our fellows, and towards God's universe. The central fact of our lives today is the absolute certainty that God has entered into our hearts and lives in a way which is indeed miraculous. He has commenced to accomplish those things for us which we could never do by ourselves. That reminds me that every day I'm sober is a miracle. I may acknowledge that. I may not appreciate it enough every day, but anytime an alcoholic is not drinking is a miracle, because that's not who we are. That's not our nature, is it? So the program has created a miracle for me. I'm supposed to talk about steps 8 and 9, which I'm going to do. And I wondered, why me 8 and 9 at the end of the day, okay? But I've now come to understand why, and I'll explain near the end of my talk, because it got me thinking a lot about steps 8 and 9, which to me are really, really important steps, and not to lose steam when we get to that point, and I'm going to tell you why in a little while. I'll tell you what I'm doing here or how I got here. I come from a family that was very loving. I was an only child of two parents that had me later in life, so I was like the little princess. And that's how I viewed life. My father was an alcoholic, a very high-functioning alcoholic. He was a professional engineer. He always provided. I never wanted for anything. I remember a lot of fighting in my house, because my mother's way of dealing with my father's drinking was to scream and yell constantly. And it did nothing. He just kept doing what he was doing, but she screamed and yelled and screamed and yelled. So it was kind of like I grew up in a little bit of a war zone, and I'm sure that affected me. Also, I learned something from that experience. My mother kept yelling at him, "You need to get your professional license. You need to get your professional license." And that's a designation if you're an engineer, to have a professional PE license. There's an engineer here, he'll know. That alcohol took that away from him. He never did take that test, because he would come home from work and go to a bar, okay, and then he'd come home drunk. So there was potential, unrealized potential, right there in the beginning, okay? And he could have, and it robs us, doesn't it? It takes away from us. It certainly took things away from me. So as a consequence of this kind of, I was fine until I got around other kids, okay? And then I wasn't a little princess anymore. I was just another kid. And I had really bad buck teeth and ears that came straight out, and people made fun of me. I remember that, but I also, full disclosure here, I made fun of people too, okay? Because I wanted to fit in, so for years and years, I just say, I was the one and I suffered from this, but I was doing the same thing other kids were doing. So I felt, as many of us do, this is not news, that I did not fit in. I felt awkward. I would be what they call social issues today. I just wanted to, so badly, to be able to be funny and fit in, and I just couldn't get there. And then, of course, one night I was with some friends, and I was 12 years old at the time when I had my first drunk. Let me say that. And we were at a house, and we had a bottle of wine. And I remember this for some reason. There's a lot in my life I don't remember after that, but I remember this. When we had that bottle of wine, I remember feeling like I fit in. I was funny. I was all the things that I wanted to be. It delivered that for me. And I got drunk the very first time that I drank alcohol. And it was crazy and wild, and I made a jackass out of myself, as I was to do many, many times after that. But that evening, two important things happened to me, okay? Very, very important. One was, somewhere in the back of my mind, hidden in my brain, where craving resides, the switch went on. okay? And everything about me changed from that first night on. That craving started right from the beginning. You're looking at someone that's really never socially drank. I started getting drunk from the very beginning. I wasn't in a position to socially drink. I was 12 years old. Sometimes I look at that now, and I've actually sat in restaurants and seen people socially drinking and say, I didn't get to do that. How ridiculous is that? But anyways, the other important thing that happened that night, it determined my destiny, okay? Because I was to be associated with alcohol for the rest of my adult life in one way or another. First as a drunk, and then as a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous. But that was to become my destiny. And quickly, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on my story, but I'll tell you a few highlights, if you want to call them that. I was a very well-behaved person, kid. I was never an A student or anything, but I was a solid B student. But I did everything everybody told me to do. I never deviated from the rules, okay? When I had that first drunk and that switch went on, everything changed. And I have a lot of people walk up to me and say, I don't really believe, really, you live this way? I did. I would never have done the things that I did as an alcoholic if it weren't for alcohol, okay? I would never have gone hitchhiking at 3 o'clock in the morning in Baltimore, which, if you're familiar with that city, is kind of a rough city. I get into the car with a complete stranger. I wouldn't do that. I'm certainly not going to do it today. I never would be a part of situations where people were hurting other people, and I was involved in that. I'm not going to get into too much detail with that, but that wouldn't have happened because that just wasn't my nature. But the alcohol led me to all these kinds of things that were totally contrary to the way I was as a person and the way I am today. It started out basically after that first drunk. I didn't set out to say, boy, I got to do this over and over. It was just kind of assumed, And again, all this was unconscious. I didn't know how drawn to alcohol I was and what was really happening to me during the course of my drinking. It was unconscious. We moved to Baltimore, and I remember early on in my drinking, I was basically doing this at school and at school dances. When the dance was going on, I was outside in the alley drinking, okay, getting as drunk as I could. Never really made it into the dance. I was not part of the cool crowd, okay? I never really considered myself part of the cool crowd in AA, okay? But yay to people that are not part of the cool crowd. I'm glad to have that today. Yes, right on, man, if you feel that way. You're in the right place, okay? And it doesn't matter that much anymore to me today, another yay. So I was outside drinking in the alleys and throwing up, getting sick, going home, and the room is spinning, okay? And I never once thought, I'm not going to do that again, okay? I mean, never occurred to me, okay? Because it was, the benefit was so great. I was out of it. I was always drunk when I was drinking. My parents, were punishing me and trying to deal with this early on, which was nothing compared to later. And I just, fine, I'm fine. Again, it never went through my head, that there's going to be a consequence. I was too much into the benefit and how it made me feel and how it let loose something in me that I wanted it to let loose, okay? So when I started drinking, it was about drinking. And remember, this is the 60s. I'm getting old. Sex, drugs, and rock and roll, okay? Not necessarily in that order, okay? But that's what my life became. And anything you can imagine about the 60s, yeah, I was in, okay? If it was bad, all right? Not if it was something on the straight and narrow, because that's not something I wanted. I went to high school, I don't know how, but I did. And again, my grades suffered. I wasn't really paying attention to high school, but I was going nonetheless, sort of. I was going on, I remember getting on the bus, going there, and getting out, walking through the school, and then out in the alleys again. I don't know, my drinking put me in a lot of alleys, okay? But I would sit, get drunk, party, and I was hardly ever in high school. I was in trouble all the time for alcohol, because it brought out the worst in me. I'm the worst version of me there is with alcohol in me. And somewhere in that period, about high school, I developed a syndrome I call the bad boy syndrome, okay? And I had it really bad, and I think there's got to be psychoanalysts in, somewhere that can understand this syndrome, because I don't get it, other than it was exciting to me, okay? The more trouble you got in, the better, because that's who I was. And I wanted that thing let loose, okay, as loose as it could get. I wanted to live on the wild side, and I did. I don't know how I got through high school, really, but I will say just a couple of incidents that happened that kind of illustrate what my drinking life was like. I was, as the situation progressed, I was getting more and more daring with the things I was doing and paying less and less attention to what my parents were trying to do for me, because they were like pulling their hair out, It took my mother, even to the day my mother died, excuse me. Well, I shouldn't say to the day she died, she did get Alzheimer's. She would say to me, you did this horrible thing to me. I can't, I can never forgive you. It was so awful. I'm 20 years sober, okay, and I'm hearing this. You ruined my life, and you made, I can never recover from all this. And, it's all true. It was all true. However, it did come a point where I can't carry that guilt the rest of my life. That's not what AA is about. Even though, yes, I did that, I can't carry it the rest of my life. I'm going to get into that, steps 8 and 9. One night I was out, and once I started drinking, I could not stop. Remember, I had that button that was on, okay? It's still on. That button's still on, okay? It's not turned off. It's a daily reprieve. It's not a monthly reprieve. It's not a weekly reprieve. It's a daily reprieve, okay? I got to remember that every single day of my life. That button is still on, okay? I was at a party and drinking and being crazy like I always was, and some guys said, let's go to Ocean City, Maryland, which would be like going from Orlando to Daytona. And I said, fine, it's 3 o'clock in the morning, let's go, man. So off I went for a week. I was like 15. At this time, I already had cards. And I believe at 14 or 15 was when I became full-blown alcoholic. It does happen to people that young. And I say that because it was running my life. It was telling me who my friends were going to be, where I was going to go, what I was going to do, and who the men in my life were going to be, and that wasn't a good choice, okay? But that particular night, I took off for Ocean City, Maryland with complete strangers, and I stayed there about a week, just partying and drinking and sleeping wherever I could. Remember, I'm into sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And I forgot to tell my parents, or didn't even think about it. I was scared to tell them that I just left, okay? And I'm out of here, man, I'm gone. So they thought I was dead. The police are looking for me and everything else. The guy that I met during this week we decided, he and I, that we were gonna run away to California together. Because I wanted to go to Haight-Ashbury, okay? And I just met this guy, okay? And I'm gonna hitchhike across the country with someone I just met, because that's how I was as a drunk, and this story tells it all, doesn't it? I stopped back in Baltimore and called a boyfriend, an old boy, just to say goodbye. I'm leaving, I'm out of here, we're leaving tomorrow, okay? So next thing you know, 15 minutes later, the doorbell rings and the police walk in. And he had called my parents, who had been frantically calling everybody they knew to say, where's my, is she dead, or what's going on here? And my parents walked in the door, and my mother said, and I remember she was crying, and she said, what do we do? What have I done, And I was the first, I told the truth that night, and I said, I really don't know. I really didn't know. I just didn't know why I was doing the things I was doing. We all know why. But there was no connection in my mind between going to a party, staying all night, doing whatever, dragging in the next morning, this over and over and over again. This was my life as a drunk. No connection in my mind whatsoever that I had an alcohol problem. It just didn't occur to me. I then got back, went back home, and one thing I want to say about that is I've come to understand that was God doing for me what I could not do for myself. Okay, because if I had put my thumb out with a complete stranger to hitchhike across the country, who knows what would have happened? Okay, I may be dead. Anything could have happened. So that was God doing for me what I could not. And He did one more thing. I'm going to tell you in a few minutes. I'm really late. So I went back to just partying all the time and doing what I'm doing and driving everybody crazy. My parents had sent me to psychiatrists, let's say the family priest, counseling, everything. They tried everything for me. They sent me to one of the best psychiatrists in Orlando, trying to figure out what was wrong. I don't remember any of those meetings. I just don't have any memory of that. And I will say this about my high school years. I give you a little idea of what I was doing. I have no memory of that. I have very little memory other than coming to, the bus and then out there partying all day, wandering the streets of Baltimore. I was basically a street person. No memory. And it becomes difficult when you're talking to like normal people and they say to you, what sports did you play in high school? Okay. How do you answer that? There is no answer, okay, other than this, all the time. I have no memory of sports or books. People mention books from high school. I don't remember anything about it. And, I look at this and say I really wasted that time. It was because I was alcoholic. It wasn't my fault. But I have this fantasy that I would have been so much more had I had that opportunity, okay, to really go to high school and go, to college normally or whatever. And it's probably a fantasy, it wasn't necessarily real, but I do think that sometimes. And it took so many years for me to recover from, maybe because I had alcoholism early in my life, that was kind of wasted, time too also that alcohol took from me. I ended up going to a favorite bar, at the end of my drinking or near the end of my drinking that I loved, okay? It was a little dive. And there was, the kind of people that went there were people that were as crazy and as wild as I had become, okay? And, the kind of things going on where, at 2 o'clock in the morning, you get hit over the head with a pool stick, okay? And that's how I lived, and I love that kind of action for some reason. Can't explain it. Again, we need a psychoanalyst in the room. So that's where I was at when I was at the end of, just in drinking, going in there, and my whole life revolved around alcohol and drugs. I threw in anything I could at any time. I smoked marijuana like it was like a chain smoker, like a cigarette smoker. But it had nowhere near the effect that alcohol did. I was hanging with the bad boys, okay? And one night, I had decided this woman was causing trouble with my man, okay, at the time. And I had to teach her a lesson. And so really the pattern was I would stay in the bar till 2 o'clock in the morning, and, until the last very second, okay? And I'm drinking as drunk as I could get. And then we would go to this house that was kind of like a wild house and party more till 6, and then you can go to bars in Baltimore at that time. And I had decided I was going to teach her a lesson. So I had gotten myself in a situation where I was ready to go, okay? I was going to walk in that house, and it wasn't going to be pretty, okay? And I say, I'm traveling with the bad boys. I know what needs to be done, okay, to solve a problem, which I saw this as a problem in my drunken, mind. And I don't know what I would have done to her. I mean, I really don't, because when I was drinking, there was no bounds. There are things I don't remember that happened to me, okay? Like I said, hitchhiking at 3 in the morning, leaving a bar, getting in a car. And I was thinking about that car that I got in. And I remember a few hours later, I was sitting on the streets, and I don't remember what happened. I don't remember if he hurt me or I hurt him. It could have gone either way. But anyways, that night I'm getting ready to walk in to solve this issue. And all of a sudden I'm walking in, and it stopped. It just stopped. the alcohol stopped working. My friend, my magic, the one that allowed me to do everything I wanted to do and be as wild and crazy as I wanted to be, because that's how I wanted to live, just stopped for me very suddenly. And I couldn't go in the house. And that was the end of it for the party part, okay? I didn't want the party to end. I've said this 1,000 times. I was always, when I was in the party, okay, I was always the last one to leave and begging people to stay, 3 in the morning, please don't go. I did not want the party to end for me. And I was willing, I just wasn't even a possibility. I wanted this to go on and on and on, and me to go up further and up further and up further. Beam me up, Scotty, get me out of here, okay? But it stopped, and I didn't go in the house. And that was the second time I believe God was doing for me what I could not do for myself, because that night could have changed the course of my life. If I had killed her, which, believe me, I was looking at that, what would have happened? Over a drunken rage, a guy I hardly knew? Okay, but that's the kind of stuff that I did when I was drinking, and I take ownership of that. It was a couple years later that I had been introduced to AA, and I did come for a while, and people, in those days, they would pick you up, and like whole groups of people would pick you up to go to meetings. And I went, and I loved going to the meetings, and I loved talking about like what we're talking about now, the drinking and the partying, and go away and tell war stories. But I didn't want to look at the steps. I didn't want to give up my lifestyle. I thought it was cool, okay? And in my mind at that time, drinking had distorted me to this level. I thought I was the one that was living the right way, and the rest of them were suckers, okay? I mean, that's just the way I saw the world. And, I could live free and do what I wanted, and the rest of you were stuck in this boring thing, okay? And I'm have this exciting life. And I did see it that way, and I didn't want to give it up. I loved it. I never looked at myself in the mirror and said, you're a degenerate, which I was. Or you should feel guilty about whatever guy you slept with. And I didn't go there. I just really liked the lifestyle. As crazy as it sounds, I hate it now. I would never even want to think about it. It makes me like yuck. But I did think that way then. But I came to AA, and then after a short period, I left, and I started being one of those people that would call, 2 o'clock in the morning. I want to kill myself. And I'm listening to Bob Dylan, and smoking cigarettes, and I'm all, emotional with this. And finally, I got calls from people in AA that said, don't call. If you want to get serious, fine, but don't call me anymore. Particularly don't call me at 2 o'clock in the morning. So I left, and for some weird reason, I thought if I stop drinking vodka and I start drinking beer, I'll be okay. Which we all know where that ended up. It took me 2 more years to come back, and it was because, and again, I kept trying and trying and trying to get back there. I couldn't get back there. So anyways, it brought me down further and further, and I wanted to go to lower and lower places and lower guys. I like the bad boys, the badder the better, okay, and that's kind of how I was. I came here because I felt like I was losing my mind. That's the only reason, not to stop the lifestyle. Remember, I didn't want to let that go. I like being a semi-criminal. But I started feeling like crazy, like one of the speakers shared, April, I believe it was. And I felt like I was in a box. I couldn't get drunk enough to turn off the pain. And yet I hated being sober. It was just totally impossible for me not to be drunk. I didn't know how to live life without that, okay? I came to AA, long story. It took a while, but finally I had my last drunk on November 28th, 1975. I was sitting in a meeting, and I want to share this one thing because it happens today too. Alcohol today does not come to me as a bottle of whiskey sitting in front of me. It comes to me with, you don't need AA anymore, okay? You're too good for them, all right? You're a lot smarter than most of them, okay? And so, it's more of like a change in thinking is how it comes to. I don't even know it's happening when it's happening unless I have somebody checking or I'm sitting in meetings and can hear this. that it's pulling me back in, but not obvious. If it's obvious, I can deal with it. If it's a bottle and I'm fighting it, but it's more, again, a change in thinking that slowly sets in, and I've experienced it, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit in a minute. I've experienced it sober. And then my last drunk, I was sitting in an AA meeting. And what was going through my mind in that AA meeting was, I can't stand him, and she's a jerk, and he's a liar, and that guy doesn't like women, okay? So I went out, left that meeting, and to get at all of them, that, all these things wrong with them, I started what was to be my last drunk through today. And I woke up in a strange place with strange people, which was not unusual. But I really hurt that day. And I felt like I just couldn't take it anymore. I called my sponsor, who came and picked me up, and I was throwing up, I was shaking, and she said to me, "You better get on your knees this time, because you're in trouble." And I knew I was. I knew it had taken over my brain. And every time the thought of it came into my mind, I acted upon it. I didn't plan it out as a drunk. It came to me again, like these, you need to get the hell out of here and this sort of thing. So I got on my knees and started praying. And I didn't believe in God, obviously, the way I was living. You're not going to believe in God, okay? That doesn't go with my lifestyle. So I started praying and praying and praying and praying, and I'm still in all this fear, and I'm scared, and the insecurities are still going on, and I feel like I'm losing my mind here. Okay, look, I stopped drinking. Give me a break, man. I need to feel good. Okay, how long? How long will it be before it changes, before it turns? And it didn't turn. I kept praying every day, but it wasn't turning in early sobriety. I still was fearful. Like it was shared. My whole life was fear. Okay, I know fear intimately. And I started getting anxiety attacks, which then I would react to with, "I'm out of here, Ben." Okay, I would be sitting in a meeting and run out of the meeting. I would be in a store, and I'd run out of the store thinking somehow this would solve it. I would sit at home trying to read books on fear. Okay, how do I deal with this? How do I be? I went to a meeting one day, and I had a really bad anxiety attack, and I left the meeting, and I said to myself, "I cannot do this. I just can't do it. I can't be here." Okay, I'm used to living in an alternative reality, not the real one. And I was in great pain. And I stopped in a halfway house, which is where I kind of hung out. It was in downtown Baltimore. It was my kind of people. And I don't remember this woman, but I remember saying to her, she happened when I walked in, I said, I'm going to turn myself in to Shepherd Pratt, which was like a mental institution in those days, and just have them shoot me up for about a month. And then I'm coming back, okay? And I will do this at that time. I just can't handle this. And she said to me, "Okay, you can go. But guess what? When you get out, you got to face it. You got to face it." And that was like the second step coming into my life, okay? That's what I've just got to I've got to stop running and just deal with this fear, okay? And AA gave me the tools to do that, where I could sit and have an anxiety attack and realize it's only going to last a couple minutes and I can get through this. And fear does not have to run my life anymore as it was, because it was insane the way I was living with the fears. Those anxiety attacks got so much better after I learned how to deal with them. But I will say, now that I'm in my senior years, I'm getting them again here and there. But guess what? I know how to deal with them, right? I have the tools. I remember, okay, how to deal with them. Sober life got better, and I'm going to talk about 8 and 9 in context of a little bit of sobriety, okay? Because a lot of times you don't have to go back and do an 8. I don't go all the way back to 8 and 9. I talk about when I needed to do 8 and 9 sober, okay? Because you will face this as you go through your sobriety. My life got better. It just continued to get better and better as a result of sobriety, and just having the ability to show up, okay, which AA gave me, and if you show up, that's half the battle to being successful at whatever it is you're doing. So I was able to show up, and my life got better and better and better, and I progressed. I was able to work where I wasn't in early sobriety because I would be sitting at my job thinking about what everybody was thinking about me because, my head's at that place, that I couldn't get the work done. So anyways, long story, I moved to Florida in that process because of a bad relationship, which is the truth. I'd like to say it's for other reasons, but I brought in my sick ideas about men with me to AA, and I'm sorry to say, it took me many, many years to deal with that issue. And I'm just going to digress for 1 minute and say, in case there's anybody in the room, I wish I had dealt with that early on, okay? Because I just hid from that part of my life as we shared. As I said, as my life progressed, I looked good. I looked like I was doing fine. I had, gone back to school, gotten the CPA, started my own business, which I still have, and everything looked great except for men. I still had real problems in that area, both sexually and with just being with the right person. I kept thinking, oh, it's just me, it's just this, it's just that. I keep picking the wrong people, not realizing that my insecurity was picking those people. It wasn't people that really I, was good with or would be a good companion. It was my insecurity picking, another fear area. And I had another fantasy. I think if I had gotten help earlier on in that area and faced it, I would have had a happier family life earlier on. Okay, it took me a long time to get right in that area with men. I was just really messed up. Again, I didn't go through the normal process of teenage years. So long story short, I just wanted to put that out there that please get help earlier. I eventually went to counseling and things did get better. And I met the right person. It took such a long time. And I don't want y'all to have to go through that. And plus the people that, the men I picked, I was like destroying them. I wanted them to be what I wanted them to be, okay? Even though they didn't have it to be that. And the psychologist said to me, why don't you just pick somebody that already has that? And I was like, God, what an incredible idea. Okay, and I finally did, but that was a fear thing. I had to walk through that door of fear to try something new, and I did, and it turned out good. But anyways, my life started getting better. I'm going to talk about 8 and 9 now, and sobriety. Okay, I obviously had a lot of amends when I got here, and it took years and years to clean them up, but my life started taking off. Again, you're showing up, okay, and that's half the battle. I started progressing in my career, had a business. I was involved in local politics really heavily, and I started moving up in everything in my life, okay? And I was doing great, really. This was about 17 years sober, and I remember it for a reason. As I progressed in the upward mobility, if you want to call it that, I started thinking less and less about the program. Even though, thank God, I was programmed to go to meetings. Okay, I was programmed to go to meetings. But I'm getting, as I'm moving up and I'm like, president of an organization and I got all these clients, I'm getting important, and I had important clients. And I was now like the total opposite of what I was as a drunk, and I'm loving this, I enjoyed it. And I started getting what they call big head, okay? And it's a term they used to use, it's now just the ego inflation. And I started thinking about how important I was, okay? And just that started taking over. I was easing God out and my ego was taking over it's unconscious. I didn't know this was going on. I'm still attending meetings and mentoring people, and thank God I was. But as the more the program left and more my ego came in, again, with me being impressed with me, okay, I started getting kind of like attitude, like I'm important, you're nothing, all right? People became somewhat, in my mind, a little bit of a commodity, like if I get friendly with that, what can they do for me? If they can't do anything for me, I don't know I'm interested, okay? I wanted everybody to be doing something for me, okay? So to enhance my life, my career, my business, put money in my pocket, And this is contrary to living a sober life and what we do with our steps. And that's what happens when you're not paying attention, okay? So I was nasty to people, really nasty, because I was pushing them around and pushing them out. If they were in my way, you dealing with the wrong person, okay? And this is what I did in politics, particularly, where I started to have like a little bit of local power that went to my head. And this was just, politics for me was really, it wasn't even about money, it was about power. And I always wanted to get a t-shirt because I was getting a lot of attention in that arena, a lot of attention all the time, because as I moved up and as I had more connections, I became more important, at least in my mind. And I'm getting attention, so I'm eating it up like a little puppy dog. And I always said I should have had a t-shirt, and I still should. Will work for pats on the head, because I just can eat up that really easily. So anyways, I was nasty to people, and somehow I didn't drink. I don't know how, because I came so close to drinking and didn't even know. Again, it's not presenting itself in a bottle, it's presenting itself in, I love this ego trip, okay? And so when that finally ended and I crashed and I ended up having to do a fourth step, with my sponsor sitting at her house, crying my eyes out, saying, I can't, it was horrible. It was like, and I began to understand, she handed me a pamphlet, The Dry Drunk Syndrome. If you've never read it, I suggest you read it, particularly if you want to be here in the long haul, because things will get between you and your sobriety at some point, believe me. I've been here a long time. I speak from experience. I went ahead and had amends to make. Sober. This is 17 years sober. I had on the list were some people they were politicians, okay? They were like big people in my mind. By the way, that situation changed my life. We'll talk about trajectory completely. When I got on that dry drunk and I came off it, and all I wanted, I'm telling you this, all I wanted was what I had when I first got here. I didn't want money, I didn't want power, I just wanted back what I had gotten in AA, because I completely lost it, and that is the emptiest feeling. I don't want to feel that way again. So I had to make all these big time amends, and I just want to digress just a little. 8 and 9, you have to keep in mind, why are those important steps? They're the main steps in my mind, and I'll tell you why. 8 and 9 come right before the promises, if you look at the book. Not 3 and 4, not 5 and 6, 8 and 9. This is the gateway to the promises. And can I say the promised land? Okay? I have to look at my list that I have and say, I may be mad at some of these people. I may have felt wrong by them. But if I owe them amends, the first thing I need to do is forgive them. Forgiveness is big part of the 8th step in my mind. When I make that list, I can really look at it and say, for me to get them from an 8 to a 9, I have to say, okay, I'm going to really work at forgiving you because I want this to be right. It says in the book, it's either in the 8th or the 9th step in the 12 and 12, my goal, and today this is true, and I'm going to explain one more thing to you before I leave. This is current in my life. My goal is to have the best possible relationships with every human being. That does not say I'm going to be best friends with every human being. I'm going to love every human being. We're going to go off into the sunset together, okay? It says the best possible relationship is my goal, okay? Just share a couple of these amends. I was scared to death to meet with this guy. He was an elected official, and I'd been really dirty to him. And I brought him and his wife to lunch, and I was scared out of my mind. I was just really, like I was for this conference, okay? And he said, that's okay, we understand, no problem. I was like, oh, what a relief, this is over, okay? I had a bunch of other people like that I'd been really nasty to during this point when I'm on a dry drunk. And it was all okay, it was good, I had one more person on the list who, in my mind, was going to be nothing, okay? I hate to say that, but it was going to be a piece of cake. I was just going to give her a quick call. I wasn't even, no lunches, no nothing. I'm just going to do this deal and get it off the list, okay? Because I had been nasty to her. I called her up and I said, I'm really sorry about blah, blah, blah. And I got, that's not okay. Okay? That is not okay. You ruined my birthday and I'm not going to forgive you. And I did. I ruined her birthday. And I left that, I hung up the phone, and the first thing I'm going like, how dare she? Okay? I mean, really, do you know who the hell I am and who you are? Okay? I mean, I've just dealt with all these big people. And so I walked around, kind of angry for a couple of days. But it taught me a huge lesson. It is not always okay. All right? I have to let it go. I've done my part. But it's not always okay when I do these things to other people. Okay? And that was the best lesson I ever learned. And I'm not going to get like a little pat on the head every time I apologize. That's not enough sometimes. I've seen her since, and we say hello, and it seems fine. But again, I learned that it's not always going to be forgiven that easily. So I look at that step, 8th and 9th, again, as the gateway to the promises. Because when I do an amends, and when I get to that point, first off, I've already had my relationship with God. I've worked on that. I've worked on my character defects. I've asked God to help let me, change me in 6 and 7. And then when I get to 9, I'm ready to implement this stuff. Okay? This is the real deal. The thing that stands between myself and the promises is fear and pride. The two hardest things to deal with, aren't they? Particularly pride. But that's what stands in the way, because on the other side, again, is a new happiness. It's a new happiness. It's a better relationship with that person. It's a burden off of me. The amends, although they are definitely for other people, are just as much for me, okay? Because I get to take that monkey off my back. In the course of preparing for this conference, I thought about steps in 8 and 9 a lot. I really had the opportunity to do that. And I remember that time I told you about when I was out of control. Well, I had a financial transaction with somebody that was, it really went sour, okay? And it was just, it was someone I had been very friendly with, but never really friends, but friendly enough. He was actually related to my sponsor. This was after my sponsor had passed away. We had this big confrontation over money. And it was an ugly time. He was really mean to me. He made my life miserable, okay? And that's all I could see for years and years. My sponsor has been gone. My sponsor, Sheila, has been gone 30 years, okay? 30 years. Just realized that yesterday. He and I, again, we meet every now and then because we have to deal with this financial transaction that's still going, and he will come to my office every now and then to discuss the status of that. And it was always like really cold, and he's wrong, he did this to me, okay? And because this stuff is swirling around in my head about 8 and 9, I thought, he's coming to my office on Friday. This was yesterday. This is the moment. This is the moment for me to take responsibility for my end of it. This is the moment for me to forgive him. So he came to my office yesterday, okay? And I kept thinking all day, maybe I'm not going to do it, I shouldn't do it, whatever. And this is 30 years in the making, friends, okay? There was a reason I was to do 8 and 9. He walks into my office yesterday, and I started like tearing up. And I said, I want to tell you how sorry I am for my part in this. And he just kind of stunned, because again, this has always been cold and very business. And, I hate him, he hates me, and there's a good reason. I never even thought about it. And usually we get right to this point, of what we're there for, and then he leaves. And I never know what's coming at me after he leaves. We started talking about Sheila, my sponsor. And it was heavy. I was just blown away, that it went so well. Things we never really talk about. And I told him, I got to finish up something. I'm going to be out of town next week, which I'm going to be out of town a couple days. And I'll get to this when I get back. And as he was leaving the office, he said to me, have a nice vacation, which is nothing, it would never happen, okay? Because again, this was really cold. Now, I'm not going to tell you guys that he's a member of my fan club, okay? Because that would not be true. But I can tell you, at this moment, I have the best possible relationship I could have with him. Okay, it's not love, it's not, we're going to start hanging out together, but it's the best possible relationship, and that's my goal. I had to level my pride yesterday and walk through my fear. And it is always worth it, because on the other side of that is the promises. It's where I'm happy, joyous, and I'm free. I'm free of this now. I never have to do this again. I've cleaned up my part of the street. A sobriety is an experience. If I had not stayed sober this length of time, I would have missed so much. Okay, there's so much of life that I've got to experience and be conscious. I've had the good, the bad, and the ugly, which I shared with you. You can't be, again, things have gone really way beyond my wildest expectations in business, in relationships with the marriage I'm in now. And you can't be around here this long without losing people, and I have lost people. I will say to you, there was a time in my life, I had a best friend here in AA, not in AA, I'm sorry, I was in AA, and I got to have that relationship for 20 years where we talked on the phone every day, and I had all the support and just several people like that not in the program that I got to have them as friends because of AA. 1 year of my sobriety, my sponsor, not Sheila, but another sponsor I had after Sheila, got cancer, and she died. And then my mother died. And then another friend died. And then the friend I had that I talked to every year for 20 years, who was always there for me for every single thing I ever went to, called me up and said, my cancer is back, and it doesn't look good. And she passed away shortly after that. I got the privilege of being there for them, each one of them, okay, as a result of this program. But my whole life was like, the floor was taken from under me, okay? I had everybody that I talked to on a regular basis. I was going to funerals all the time that year. My whole life changed. It was distorted. I was lost for a period of time. But I was able to stay sober and adjust to that loss, okay? And Sheila's been gone a long time. She had a lot of influence on my life, but she's been gone 30 years, and there's two people I'd like to say that really have been there for me, and I am very, very fortunate to have them in my life. One is my friend Cheryl, and one is Randy, who make my life better all the time, and they're here with me. They're always with me. So I just want to say that if I had not faced 8 and 9 yesterday, I would have missed so much. I would have missed have a nice vacation, okay? What we give away here cannot be bought. We give it away for free. You can't pay for it, can you? And I'm so fortunate that I've gotten to live this life. And I encourage all of you, hang in there, go to meetings, work on your inventory. Don't forget to do that. You don't want to get messed up like me. And stay involved. Stay involved. Even on the days you don't want to, because believe me, I've been there in 50 years. Yeah, I have days I don't want to do stuff. But stay, just the most important thing, Dr. Bob, one of the most important things he said, stick-to-itiveness. Learn to stick-to-itiveness with this program. Thank you.